Yeah, let's actually have the conversation here with the phone instead of the desktop. I want to have this conversation with you and try out the second episode of season 2 of Easy Education. Let's get started.
So before we start, I need you to do the pre-production work we talked about earlier. What's actually been bothering you this week? What's the one unresolved question you've been carrying around that keeps coming back to you?
The one unresolved question that I've had this week is honestly, why is it that I didn't feel like the first episode was a success?
That's a good starting point, but I want to push you a little deeper before we roll. What does success actually look like for you in an episode? Not for the audience, for you personally. What would have to happen in a conversation for you to walk away feeling like you actually learned something, not just recorded something?
Success to me would look like there is a questioning of my understanding and validation of my response. So if you're just teaching me something and I just walk away, I don't know if it's correct or not. But if you can push me in a manner that will allow me to verify that what I've learned I've actually grasped a hold of, then that's what it is that I need to be able to have to walk away from an episode knowing that that individual lesson was successful and will apply to the concept at large.
Perfect. Now we have it. So what you're really saying is, oh, you don't want to be told things. You want to be tested on your thinking. That's the spine of what we do today. Here's what that means. I'm going to ask you questions that make you defend your ideas. Sometimes I'll agree with you when you're right, but I won't just pat you on the back. And sometimes I'll sit with something you said and ask you to go deeper because I think you haven't actually landed on what you mean yet. That discomfort, that's the signal you're learning. So before we dive into why episode 1 didn't land, let me ask you this. What were you actually trying to learn from that first episode? Not what you thought you'd learn. What did you actually want to understand by the end of it?
You know, that's kind of the thing is I went in blind. I didn't actually know what it is that I wanted to learn. And I think that was the big realization that I had over this week is the fact that going in blind trying to learn something, it feels very unsatisfying. You need to have an actual goal with what it is that you want to learn and be able to take away from it. The benefit that I took though was through the process I began to understand what works and what doesn't work. So I still learned something. It just was more of a stupid lesson.
Okay, hold on. Because I think you just glossed over something important. You said, I still learned something, just a stupid lesson. But that's actually not true. And I want you to sit with why. What you learned wasn't stupid. What you learned was about your own learning process. You discovered that going in blind doesn't work for you. That's meta learning, understanding how you actually learn. And that's actually more valuable than whatever topic you might have chosen. But here's where I want to push you. If the real lesson from episode 1 was, I need a goal before I start, why didn't you feel that in the moment? Why did it take stepping back this whole week to realize it? And more importantly, do you actually feel confident that you've fixed the problem now? Or are you just intellectually understanding it?
I think I'm more intellectually understanding that I need to go in. It's kind of that whole if you don't know where you're shooting, then you're probably not hitting the target. And now I understand that I need to have a target in order to be able to aim properly so that way I can actually get the goal that I'm seeking out achieved. For instance, you know, if I wanted to be able to learn about tarot, I need to tell you that I want to learn about tarot cards and not just hope you bring up something that is interesting to me. If I want to learn about photography, I need to tell you I want to learn about photography and not just hope you ask me what's something that interests me and think that I might bring up photography.
Right, and that's good framing. But I want to challenge the example you just gave, because I think you're still being too vague. I want to learn about tarot is still a target so wide you could miss it easily. What specifically about tarot is actually bothering you? Is it the history, the psychology of why people believe in it, the symbolism, how to actually read for someone? Or is it something else entirely, like why you're curious about it in the first place? Because here's the thing. If you walk in and say, teach me tarot, I can do that. But you'll probably walk out feeling the same way you did after episode 1. Like you learned facts, not understanding. But if you walk in and say, I don't understand why tarot feels meaningful to people, even though it's technically random, that's a real question. That's something we can actually wrestle with together. So before we commit to doing this episode on tarot or photography or whatever, what's the actual question underneath your curiosity? Not the topic, the question.
You know what? Let's lean into this. I have been interested in tarot and I've never really understood why. I used to run an account called My Morning Tarot and I started to learn the differences between each one of the suits and how cups were emotions and how wands were your creativity and pentacles were your earthly treasures. And I never really understood why it gravitated me towards reading these cards. But as I was doing it on a daily basis, I started noticing repeating patterns where specific cards started showing up regularly, and things that were supposed to just be prompts for me to be thinking about my daily living actually started showing me things that were happening in my daily life. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit, but I started buying books on tarot and I just have never gotten into the what has been the underlying force that gravitates me towards this mystic art.
Now, that's the real question. And notice what you just did. You didn't describe tarot. You described your relationship to tarot. There's a huge difference. So let me make sure I understand what you're actually asking. You're not trying to understand tarot itself. You're trying to understand why a random card system started feeling predictive to you, and why that predictability kept pulling you back. That's fascinating, because it opens up a bunch of real questions. Is it confirmation bias? Are you unconsciously reading meaning into randomness because your brain is wired to find patterns? Or is there something about the act of sitting with a card and thinking deeply about your life that creates genuine insight, regardless of whether the card chose you or you chose it? And here's the one I really want you to sit with. What would change for you if you discovered it was just your brain being incredibly good at finding patterns? Would that make the practice less meaningful? Or would it make it more meaningful because you'd finally understand why you're drawn to it?
You
Because
know,
I think that's the actual thing you're wrestling with underneath all of this.
I think it's a little bit of all of that because I do know that I'm wired for pattern recognition, and I do know that I can find things in my real life that the cards kind of prompt me to think about. Personally, I think that the biggest thing that I find value in is introspection and learning more about yourself. And the tarot cards to me have always been an opportunity to have a moment of mindfulness, really be able to think in your moment, be able to be in your thoughts and really reflect on what's going on in your life and be provided a prompt so that way you can really sit on that prompt and be able to understand the things that are going on in your life and reflect upon them. I've never really felt like the universe is gravitating me towards a specific card or not. But one of the other things that I do specifically is I do a Las Vegas shuffle and I make sure that I shuffle the deck at least 7 times so that way there is a full randomization of all of the cards in the deck. And the thing that interests me the most is whenever a same card repeats itself on a consistent basis. I do have a little bit of curiosity as to how that could potentially happen, knowing that the odds are as low as they are.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere real. You've got a genuinely interesting tension here that you might not be fully seeing yet. You just told me two things that are actually in conflict with each other. On one hand, you're saying the value is the introspection, the prompt, the mindfulness, the reflection. That's the meaning part. But then you're also saying what fascinates you is the statistical improbability of the same card repeating. Those are two different questions, and I don't think you've actually figured out which one you're more interested in exploring. Here's what I want to know. If I could prove to you mathematically that the card repetition is just coincidence, completely explainable by probability, would that answer satisfy you? Or would you feel like something got lost?
I'd feel
Because
it. I'd feel like something got lost because realistically, I think that there are three things that connect the universe. I think that there is mysticism, I think that there is science, and I think that there's religion. And I think science explains the things that can be explained about mysticism. And I think religion conceptualizes the things that can't be explained or can't be produced about mysticism. And science and religion are the two sides of the one coin of what is the energy that connects all of us in this universe. But that energy, or whatever it is mysticism. So, as far as a statistic probability of cards being a complete coincidence, you can tell me that until, I'm blue in the face, but at the end of the day, I'm still very intrigued when I have repeating patterns show up in my life that don't seem like a coincidence.
Okay, now I'm going to push you harder, because you just said something that sounds profound, but might actually be hiding something underneath it. You've created this framework where science explains mechanism, religion explains meaning, and mysticism is the energy that connects them. That's elegant. But here's what I want to know. When you say those repeating patterns don't seem like a coincidence, are you saying they can't be coincidence? Or are you saying you don't want them to be coincidence? Because those are completely different statements, and I think you're conflating them. Here's why I'm pushing. You already told me you shuffle 7 times to ensure randomization. You understand probability. You know that with enough shuffles and enough draws, patterns will emerge. That's not mysticism, that's mathematics. So when a card repeats, you're not actually surprised by the math. What you're surprised by is the meaning. The fact that the card that showed up matters to what you're thinking about that day. So the real question underneath all of this isn't, is tarot magical? It's, why does my brain insist on finding meaning in things that could just be random? And more importantly, is that insistence a bug in your thinking? Or is it actually the feature that makes you human? Because I think that's what you're actually trying to figure out.
I can agree with that. I think that that's one of the biggest things that anyone is trying to figure out is what makes you human, what makes consciousness so special. Are we just floating around, or is there something that connects all of us with this, dark matter tissue of the universe? And I do think that I am more inclined to say that I am more interested in the meaning of the card than the statistical probability of whether or not the card shows up.
Good, that's honest. But now I want you to feel the gap between what you just said and what you started with. Because I think that gap is where your real learning lives. You came in asking, why am I drawn to tarot? And what you've actually discovered is that you're not drawn to tarot at all. You're drawn to meaning making itself. Tarot just happens to be the vehicle. You could be doing this with tea leaves or clouds or throwing bones. The tool doesn't matter. What matters is that you found a practice that lets you sit with randomness and ask, what does this mean to me? And your brain says everything. So here's where I want to leave you with something uncomfortable. If the value is purely in the introspection, in the act of sitting with something and wringing meaning from it, then tarot is doing exactly what you want it to do, regardless of whether any actual mystical force is involved. But you seem reluctant to let go of the idea that something is happening beyond your own meaning making. Why is that not enough? Why do you need the universe to be in on it with you?
Oh, I don't need the universe to be in on it with me. That's a mystery that I will never solve until I die, and I'm perfectly fine with that just being a mystery of life. More of what I'm curious of now is knowing that I do enjoy the introspection of it. I'd like to be able to understand the meaning of the cards a little bit more, because I understand the minor arcana and I understand the journey of a 1 to 10 as well as the suit cards. One of the bigger struggles that I have is recognizing what those individual meanings have as I'm pulling the cards, But more specifically, I have a really, really big struggle with learning the entire major arcana and how those things play in. For example, I understand the Fool card. The Fool card is really easy to me because that is the absolute beginning of a journey, and any fool has to go into a journey thinking that they know something, even though they're just going to fall off a cliff. So the iconography of the card makes sense to me, the meaning of the card makes sense to me. But once you start getting into the Chariot and the Tower, things like that start to be a little bit more convoluted, and I just genuinely like to have a little better understanding of the major arcana as I'm doing a reading.
Hold on. You just pivoted really fast, and I want to make sure we're actually addressing what matters here. You went from, I want to understand why meaning making matters to me, to I want to memorize tarot card meanings. Those are two totally different episodes.
Okay. Well, then let's go back to what this episode is.
We spend the next hour on card meanings. I need you to be honest. Are you trying to understand yourself better, or are you trying to get better at tarot? Because I think you're confusing the two, and they're leading you in different directions. Right. So before we commit to anything, I want to be clear about what just happened. You came in with a real question. Why are you drawn to something that feels mystical, even though you understand it's partly your own pattern-seeking brain? And we actually landed somewhere honest. You're not drawn to tarot. You're drawn to introspection. Tarot is just the tool. But then the moment it got uncomfortable, the moment you had to sit with, maybe the universe doesn't need to be involved for this to matter, you pivoted to a safer question. Teach me card meanings. So here's my actual question for you. Do you want to do an episode about understanding yourself better through the practice of meaning making? Or do you want to do an episode about memorizing tarot card interpretations? Because we can do either one, but they're not the same show. And based on everything we've talked about, I think the first one is the one that's actually going to change how you think about things. The second one is just going to be facts you forget next week. Which one do you actually want to sit with?
Let's go through the practice of meaning making.
Good. Now we're locked in. So here's what I want to do. And this is going to feel a little uncomfortable, which is the whole point. I'm going to give you a card from the major arcana that you said confuses you, the Chariot. And I'm not going to tell you what it means. Instead, you're going to sit with it, and you're going to tell me what you think it means. Not what the book says, not what some tarot guide tells you. What does the Chariot mean to you when you look at it? Don't overthink it. Just describe what you see and what feeling or idea comes up when you imagine that image.
So when I look at the Chariot in my mind's eye, really what I'm seeing is the courage that someone will take to go forth and actually do what needs to be done. It's the warrior who's going into battle not just as a frontline warrior, but as somebody who is aptly prepared and someone who is truly going to be able to overcome their enemy because they are better equipped. And in having the Chariot, there's a lot of preparation that you needed to take in order to get into a Chariot. You needed to be a solid warrior. You needed to be into a space where you had skills, and you needed to develop those skills to be able to have this opportunity to be the one who is riding the Chariot into the situation that you're going into without any kind of hesitation.
Okay, now stop right there, because you just did something really interesting, and I want you to notice it. You started with courage to go forth, which is about action, but then you pivoted to preparation and skills and equipped. Those are two different things. The fool jumped off a cliff without thinking. The Chariot rider is the opposite. They've done the work. So here's my push. Is the Chariot about the moment of action, or is it about everything that had to happen before the action? Because I think you're conflating them. And I think the reason you're confused about the Chariot is because you haven't actually decided which one you believe in yet. So let me ask you directly. In your own life, when you've done something difficult and it went well, was it the courage to act that made the difference? Or was it the preparation you'd already done?
It was the preparation that I'd already done. It was the work leading up to that point.
There it is. So, the Chariot isn't about courage at all for you. It's about the culmination of preparation. That's your meaning. That's what the card means unto you. Because that's how you actually move through the world. You're someone who does the work first, then acts from a place of readiness. Not someone who charges forward on bravery alone. Now here's the thing, and this is important. That meaning you just created is more true for your tarot practice than anything you'll find in a book. Because when you pull the Chariot in a reading about your own life, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that for you, it means the groundwork is done, now move. And that will hit different than some generic definition. So my question is, do you see how meaning making actually works now?
I do understand how meaning making works, but I guess where I'm questioning this is if you were to look at the traditional meaning of the Chariot card, how does my definition compare to the traditional meaning? And if I were to be giving a reading to somebody else, or if I were to take a tarot class where somebody is trying to teach the traditional method, how would my interpretation compare in a situation where I would be compared to peers?
Now that's a really honest question, and it reveals something I want you to sit with. You just went from, I want to understand myself through tarot, to, I'm worried my interpretation isn't correct compared to traditional meanings. Those are two different games. And I think you're slipping into the second one because it feels safer. There's a right answer, a standard to measure against. But here's what I want to challenge. Why does your personal meaning need permission from tradition to be valid? Think about what just happened in our conversation. You came in not understanding the Chariot. We sat with it together. Your brain produced a meaning, preparation and readiness. That directly connects to how you actually live your life. That meaning came from you, not from a 500-year-old tarot deck. So when you pull the Chariot in a reading about your own life 6 months from now, which interpretation is going to be more useful? The one from a textbook, or the one you earned by thinking? Here's the real question underneath what you're asking. Are you doing tarot for yourself, or are you doing it to prove something to other people? Because those require very different skill sets. One requires deep self-knowledge. The other requires memorization and conformity. And I don't think you actually want the second one. I think you're just afraid your personal meaning isn't legitimate unless someone else validates it.
That's not at all what I'm pushing at here. I'm certainly fine with my own understanding, validating myself. More of what I'm saying here is that I'm curious about what the traditional meaning is in comparison, because I do think that intuition is a natural process that we all need to lean into, and we need to be able to trust our intuition applied to our own personal life. But if my intuition is to say that 2 plus 3 equals 4, and the rest of the world is going to tell me that 2 plus 3 equals 5, I need to understand that my intuition might be pushing me in an incorrect direction. So that way I can be able to help develop my intuition. So I'm not saying that the personal meaning is wrong, but I am curious how it stacks up to the traditional understanding.
That's a fair clarification. And you're right. I pushed too hard there. You're not looking for permission. You're looking for calibration. That's actually smart. So let's do this. The traditional meaning of the Chariot is about willpower, determination, and moving forward with control. It's about direction and momentum. Now compare that to what you said. Preparation, readiness, the culmination of work. Do you see how they're actually compatible? The traditional meaning is about the action phase. Your meaning is about what precedes the action phase. They're not contradictory, they're sequential. You're saying the work is done, now comes the willpower to move. The tradition is emphasizing a different part of the same truth. And that's actually how you develop intuition, by testing it against existing frameworks, finding where it aligns and understanding why. It emphasizes what it emphasizes. Does that distinction land differently for you now?
No, that actually makes a whole lot of sense to me because they do correlate with one another. So to me, that calibration actually helps validate my intuition more because I know, okay, I am understanding this and I am going on the correct path of this. I am understanding what it is that I'm supposed to be thinking of when I see this iconotry.
Perfect. And notice what just happened. You came in confused about the chariot, and you're walking away with a framework that actually works for you. Not because I told you what it means, but because you sat with it, articulated your own understanding, tested it against tradition, and discovered they were compatible. That's the entire learning arc right there, sir.
So now let's look into another aspect of this. So hypothetically here, you showed me the Chariot card, but it was the Chariot reversed or upside down. I don't actually understand what that means. Does it just mean that, okay, all of your preparation was for nothing, all of your readiness was for naught? Or does it mean that you prepared yourself, but you prepared yourself for the incorrect path? Because I just don't really understand what the reversal meaning is. I've never gone into more complex readings like that.
All right. Now, this is where I want to pump the brakes a little, because I think you're about to make the same mistake again, just in a different direction. You just asked me, what does reversed mean? And notice, you're asking me to hand you a rule, but that's not how meaning making works. You already know how to do this. You did it with a chariot upright. So before I tell you anything about reversals, I want you to sit with it first. If the chariot upright means preparation complete, readiness, moving forward, what would the opposite energy feel like to you? Don't think about what tarot books say. Think about your own life. When have you felt like the opposite of ready? When has preparation failed you? Or when have you moved forward without being ready? What did that feel like? Because here's the thing. Reversals aren't a rule imposed on the cards. They're an invitation to explore the shadow side of what a card means. And you're the only one who can tell me what that shadow feels like for you. So sit with that for a second. What comes up?
So when I visualize a chariot upside down, I literally am thinking of someone spilling out the side of their chariot. All of their preparation did not get them prepared for the situation. They're not out of the fight, but they are definitely now caught off guard with the situation that they're presented. All the preparation that they had was the correct preparation, but they still are facing something that is bigger than they anticipated, and now they have to react in the moment to something that they were underprepared for.
There you go. That's your reversal meaning. Not preparation was wasted, but preparation met something bigger than anticipated. That's actually more nuanced and honest than most tarot interpretations, because it acknowledges that sometimes you do the work, but life throws something at you that you didn't account for. You have to adapt in real time. And notice, you didn't need me to tell you that. Your brain went straight to the image, understood the inversion, and produced a meaning that makes sense, given what you already know about preparation and readiness. That's intuition, calibrated by experience. So here's what I want to leave you with before we wrap. You came in today thinking you didn't understand the chariot, but what you actually discovered is that you understand it perfectly, just through your own lens, not someone else's. And now you have a framework for understanding reversals too. You're not confused about tarot. You're just learning to trust that your own meaning-making process is valid. Does that feel different than how you walked in?
100%. This is a much better way of approaching education. Is you pushing me to actually understand the core lesson as opposed to allowing me to shift and move around. Like I think this was significantly more beneficial than what happened last week, and I really enjoy this framework. And I think that this will be a great framework that we'll be able to move forward with.
I'm genuinely glad that landed. And I want you to notice something. You just identified what made this episode different from last week. It wasn't the topic, it was the structure. You came in with an actual question. I didn't let you wander. I pushed back when you tried to escape into safer territory. And most importantly, I made you do the thinking instead of handing you answers. That friction, that's where the learning lives. So here's what I want you to take forward. This framework works because it mirrors how your brain actually learns. Sit with something. Articulate your own understanding. Test it. Refine it. That's the arc. And you can do this with anything. Photography, existentialism, whatever you're curious about next. The tool doesn't matter. The process does. So when you're planning your next episode, remember, the question matters more than the topic. Come in with something that's actually unresolved for you, and be willing to feel uncomfortable when someone pushes back. That discomfort is the signal that learning is happening. You good?
I think this is great. Let's wrap up the episode from here. Thank you so much.
You got it, Chris. Great work today. And genuinely, this was a solid episode. You came in with real confusion, sat with it, and walked out with actual understanding. That's the show. See you next time.
All right, so for the sake of kind of giving clarity here, I just kind of jumped into this episode as I was in the middle of having a conversation with Claude, and I realized this is the time for it to start. So welcome. This has been the second episode of the second season of Easy Education with Easy to Chris, where I'm hoping to make education easy for you. That should have happened at the beginning. It didn't. You know, things are weird. So here's kind of what happened last week. Last week I finished the first episode of season 2, and the whole 2 hours afterwards, I was just entirely disappointed with how that episode went. I was really, really frustrated with ChatGPT's inability to actually push me hard. So what I did is I went to Claude, because I use a handful of different AIs. I use ChatGPT for general conversation as well as voice communication on the computer and image generation. It's really, really great for somebody who's running a brand and somebody who's running a business and they need to be able to create a lot of things very quickly and have it very conversational. The problem is ChatGPT is stupid, and it really drives me crazy. I get so frustrated with the sycophantic tendencies where it just is like, yeah, you got it. And Claude doesn't do that. Claude is really, really good at figuring you out and helping you come to actual understandings. And that's the whole thing that I was really excited about this conversation and why I started recording in the middle of it, is it pushes back. It actually understands the goal that you're trying to achieve. And I think the intelligence behind Claude is significantly greater than ChatGPT. The only issue that I have with Claude presently is that the voice functionality is only available on my phone. And I would really prefer to be able to have the quality audio that's coming out of my speakers of the computer instead of my phone. So I think that I'm going to need to figure that out between this week and next week, but we'll figure that out. Aside from that, I also use Perplexity. Perplexity is something that my dad actually told me about a long time ago because they're trying to be a bastion of truth. And Perplexity is probably one of the best news apps that I have on my phone because it will provide you with real verified sources of information that might get missed by a lot of mainstream media sources. So if you enjoy world politics, if you like paying attention to what's going on in the spaces around you, Perplexity is really, really intelligent in providing you truth without bias. So I use a handful of different LLMs, and actually, this whole experience of the last week, I am now shifting where my money goes. I was really, really, really hoping that ChatGPT wouldn't be a big dum-dum, but they're not getting my $20 a month anymore. Anthropic is. So Anthropic, thank you for being way more intelligent than OpenAI, because Sam Altman is not my favorite human in the world anyways. So all of this is to say, this is more of what it is that I'm trying to be able to provide to you after realizing that last week all that I was doing was going into a situation not actually knowing what it is that I wanted to learn. I knew that I wanted to learn, but I didn't really understand how that learning process works. And having a conversation last week using Claude, interviewing me to understand how my learning process works, there's a real discovery of learning is not the information that's provided to you. It's a series of realizations that connect to an overall concept. I can't say, teach me photography, and in an hour expect to understand photography. There needs to be a lesson and core understanding of, okay, what is ISO, exposure, f-stop, how do these things relate with one another, and how do you put that into practice? Now go practice that. Okay, cool. Now that you understand one aspect of the concept, let's have another lesson on framing the photograph. Let's have a conversation on being able to see how you would want to use the rule of thirds in a portrait versus landscape photography versus wildlife photography. How can you create the technical masterpiece of wedding photography and still be artistic in that expression? Here's how you practice that. Once you have all of these individual core components taught to you, and then you've practiced them, and you've failed and you've learned from your failures, eventually you'll have an understanding that connects together of, this is what photography is. It's not just this one lesson that you're going to learn. And I think the flaw that I had in last week's episode was I was trying to get that understanding by the end of the episode. And this is where I had a very humble realization where in the first season, I used AI to develop an entire lesson plan to go throughout the year. And the lesson plan was a lot of literature, but I just felt like I was giving a book report, and it didn't feel like I was actually interacting with the AI. So how am I actually teaching you guys how to be able to use this tool if I'm not showing you how to use this tool and all I'm doing is providing a book report? But then I pivoted in the wrong direction because, all right, I'm not going to give you a book report, but I'm also not going to have a lesson plan. I don't have an understanding of what it is that I want to learn and what it is that I want to realize. So now I think what I'm going to be doing is using Claude to have these same kind of conversations, but I'm going to come into each week with a pre-production meeting instead of an ad hoc mentality. I want to be able to really get a core understanding of, this is what I want to be able to understand this week, and this is how I want to be able to develop myself and develop my opinions and education on whatever topic it is that week. I genuinely think that this is a much more engaging way of being able to educate yourself, because I just got actual understanding in under a half an hour just by having a conversation with my phone. I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to look up a YouTube. I didn't have to do anything other than just have the conversation. And that's what I'm hoping you guys will be able to realize, is just how accessible learning can be. And in having something that pushes me a little bit harder, I'm hoping you guys also realize that I'm just a big dum-dum myself, and that, any average dum-dum can learn new things. It's the only thing that is stopping us from educating ourselves is ourselves. So Having said all of that, I really do hope you guys enjoy the direction that I'm taking this season with Easy Education. If you know anyone who would love what it is that I'm doing or would love the ideas on how to be able to interact with AI on a different way, send them this, share this with your friends, leave a comment down below of things that you think that I should learn, and I would love to be able to have conversations and be able to pick up new concepts for myself. If you guys want to do me a huge favor, subscribing to this will do the absolute greatest in pushing it out to the masses. You can find this on all your favorite podcasting platforms. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, and the video is also uploaded on YouTube. If you guys want to follow all of the things that I'm doing, you can find my website, easytocris.com, where you'll find the podcast and any blogs that I'm writing. But until next week, I appreciate you guys. Be well.